I know the folks at Howard are happy about this, boy. Howard is doing some things right now. I will say to all the Howard Bison out there, shout out to all of you for doing what it is that you do very, very well. But I want to start by talking about this book, Malcolm Lives, because as I mentioned in the very first part of the show, there are so many adults, particularly men, but so many adults that I know whose lives were completely transformed by reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. Talk to us about what compelled you to pen this particular book specifically with young people in mind.
So I think most of us who read the autobiography of Malcolm X, like myself, and were completely transformed, it was typically when we were in high school or even in our 20s, if not our 30s. And and so for me, why can't that transformation come earlier? Why can't that transformation come when we're 12 years old or 14 years old or 16 years old? And if we can think back about that person that we became after we were transformed by the autobiography of Malcolm X, I think most of us regret, right, who we were before that. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pen Malcolm Lives, right? So that we can be transformed by Malcolm's message, by his life, that much earlier.
Mm. And let's talk about that transformation a little bit for those who may have had some distance between the lived experience of reading it, having the transformation. Talk with us about what the transformation has looked like as you've encountered people who have encountered that book in particular. Talk to us about who some of us were before as compared to who we are after that transformation. Now, I know y'all in the audience, I know we all have our own personal experiences with this, but Dr. Kendi, I'd like it because you have a bird's eye view onto the impact of these literary texts onto the lives of our community. Talk to us about the impact that that book has had broadly as it pertains to shifting our perceptions about who Malcolm X is in our lived memory, and the impact that that sort of transformation has as it pertains to a community's capacity to reinvent itself with an eye more towards self-determination.
I think there are many different ways in which Malcolm's message has transformed Black people. Certainly, the autobiography of Malcolm X. I think I would argue the major transformation that that book has had for Black people, which I hope Malcolm Lives can have too, is it allowed Black people to really wrestle with what we call now internalized racism,
Right.
or the ways in which Black people think that there's something wrong with Black people.
Mm.
Malcolm gave a famous speech in LA in 1962, in which he said to a crowd of Black people, "Who taught you to hate yourself?" And again, he urged Black people to love themselves. He urged Black people to realize that those ideas suggesting that there was something wrong or inferior about them or even Africa, that those ideas were the problem. Speaking about Africa, he would say to Black people, "Why do you think white people are there? Why do you think they keep going there and trying to take over? Because it's beautiful, because of the resources that
Right.
were there." And of course, he was talking to Black Americans who had been taught that there was something wrong about Africa.
Mm. And so this book, Malcolm Lives, as I mentioned, it is intended, as I understand it, for a younger audience. What fresh perspective are you introducing to this younger audience? What are some of the things they're going to get from Malcolm Lives that perhaps might have been touched in other books, but not to the depth and to the levels that you do so in this text?
Well, first, I'm hoping that young people and even older readers realize how much Malcolm had to navigate as a young person. And I spent quite a bit of time narrating Malcolm's life as a youth. And this is a person who literally, while his mother was pregnant, uh, she faced down Klansmen, in Omaha, Nebraska. When he was, a toddler, his home, his parents' home was firebombed. He believed that his father, was lynched. He faced poverty and hunger. His mother was institutionalized. His siblings and him were broken up. He was sent to a detention home. He faced issues with the law. He was incarcerated. So many issues that young people in that form of adversities are facing. He had a teacher shoot down his dream of being a lawyer, right? These are the things that our young people are wrestling with. So I think it's for young people who are counted out and looked down upon, for them to see their experiences reflected in Malcolm's life, and then for them to see who he became, to me is going to be deeply inspiring.
It is just to hear you recount some of the things that he navigated, because and those of you who perhaps haven't even read the book but you saw the film, we remember some of those very pivotal scenes where his father is navigating what he is going through, where the hatred that his family was exposed to at such a young age, his mom, who phenotypically looked like she might have been able to pass but clearly did not, and brought to her family, as did his father, a real understanding of Garveyism and the need
Yeah.
to connect what we were experiencing with the broader community. What is it that you, as it pertains to the power of transformation, because we see Malcolm's life across his lifespan, we know him as Detroit Red, we know him as Malcolm Little, we know him as all these different characters, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, and at every different inflection point where we see a name change, for example, or we see his position and stature change when he's incarcerated, where Bimby is teaching him how to go through the dictionary, all of these transformations. For me, the fact that we know so much about how his life morphed, it's inspiring because it feels like it unleashes the capacity for all of us to tap into the power of transformation. Like who we are
Mhm.
today, one of my favorite law professors, Brian Stevenson, says that we are more than the worst thing we've ever done. And who we are today does not have to be who we are tomorrow. And the power of
Exactly.
transforming as we learn more, as we adjust to this system, is something that is so important. And I hope that as readers come to this text, that power of transformation is something that they will glom onto as well, not just as an individual, but as a community, as a collective. I'd like to, if you could. Well, one, where do you want us to buy the book? Because we know the big boys got it. Where do you want us to go, Dr. Kendi, to get the book?
Well, I mean, just most of us live by a black-owned bookstore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can hit up that independent black-owned bookstore, and they can order the book. They may even have the book. They may even have a signed copy of it. If you don't live near a black-owned bookstore, you could hit up bookshop.org,
Yep.
which allows you to purchase from black-owned bookstores and other independent bookstores, and it comes to your home. So there's a number of places you could get Malcolm List from.
Excellent. I love that. Uh, Sticking with this theme of transformation, we are witnessing a transformation in this nation, the
Mhm.
likes of which I used to think as a kid watching the Eyes on the Prize, like, whoo, imagine what it was like to live when people explicitly hated you and all that explicit white supremacy. Glad that's over. Well, Dr. Kendi, here it is back again. And we are seeing, and I'd seen in one article you mentioned that the world that is being constructed and shaped right now is one that Malcolm X actually would have recognized. The
Mhm.
world that this nation is leading into is a world that was very familiar to folks who grew up and navigated the world prior to the 1960s. Talk to us about what that sort of transformation means in terms of our lived experiences as people of African descent, and what it means in terms of our potential to meet this moment if we're able to tap into the history of how our ancestors navigated what this moment looked like previously.
I think tapping into that history of our ancestors who met the moment of enslavement, who met the moment of colonization, is really tapping into their courage, into
Mm-hmm.
their fearlessness. And tapping into their courage and fearlessness is tapping into Malcolm
Mm.
X. I mean, there were a number of pivotal figures in American history who explicitly expressed their fearlessness, and one was Malcolm X. I'm reminded of days before his assassination, when his home was firebombed with him and his wife and his girls sleeping there. And after the firebombing, of course, the press shows up, and he says, this doesn't phase me. This is not going to stop me. This is not going to quiet me down.
Right.
And so no matter what he faced, and no matter what our ancestors faced, we didn't stop resisting. We didn't stop speaking up and standing out.
Mm. And we're, as we're looking at, as I've followed the careers of folks like yourself, we've seen Nicole Hannah Jones and sort of how she's navigated the vitriol that so many of you who have written extensively about these topics, who are doing the work of expanding the American knowledge base about these topics. We've seen how the attacks have come, and so we do keep a prayer list on Urban View, and shout out to Clay Kane, who's got the perfect prayer list and the perfect playlist, and so we keep y'all in prayer and uplifted. But I'm also noticing a trend of those of us who have been able to be welcome in spaces that were not owned by us. In this moment, it could be pure coincidence. I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. In this moment, finding home in spaces that are more in alignment with the needs of our community. Talk to us about what you're seeing in terms of Black intellectualism. We're seeing attacks on science, on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, on history, on books that has been ramping up in recent years. Which years ago I thought it had ramped up enough, but it's still going. Talk to us about this transformation, this societal transformation that is, while cutting off a lot of pathways to what we have traditionally defined as success, are also seemingly opening up roads and bridges to institutions that will allow us to more fully embrace who we are and more fully show up in our capacity to meet the needs of our folks.
I certainly think that's happening. And, to give my sort of personal story, it's not a coincidence that I'm deciding to go to Howard, to go to a place that has a long history of supporting scholars who study anti-Black racism. It isn't a coincidence that HBCUs are having record numbers of applications, that
Right.
you have Black students who are choosing Howard and FAMU and Spelman and Morehouse and Hampton, over Yale and Stanford, and Princeton. This isn't a coincidence. And I think something is happening, in this moment in which Black people are choosing Black people, and recognizing the importance of that.
Mm. And at the same time, the attacks against those institutions are increasing as well.
Yeah.
Right now, I run a law center based at Medgar Evers College here in Brooklyn, and I was at an event last night. Shout out to the men of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. The Gamma Iota Lambda chapter was the first D9 organization to have their historic papers installed at the Brooklyn Historic Society, or I'm sorry, the Center for Brooklyn History. They just rebranded the Center for Brooklyn History. So it was a phenomenal conversation last night. One of the things, Dr. Walter M. Kimbrough was one of the panelists on stage with me, and one of the things that he and I talked about was the fact that D9 institutions, particularly those who are at predominantly white institutions, are going to be facing these sorts of attacks. And we're looking at HBCUs that are also finding themselves in the crosshairs. Just, I believe it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, the Department of Education under the Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris administration sent letters to the attorneys general of, I believe it was 13 Republican-led states, that basically outlined the billions, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars
Yeah.
that those states had robbed, stolen from HBCUs, money that was rightfully theirs. So we know that the attacks on these institutions also going to increase. From your vantage point, someone who has weathered some storms, like we saw what happened when they was coming for you at previous institutions. I was like, well, damn, these people are really aggressive. As you have navigated that storm and as you are seeing some of the other storm clouds ahead, what do members of our community who are a part of these institutions proper, but members of our communities generally, how should we be organizing to protect these institutions? Medgar Evers College is not an HBCU. It's a predominantly Black institution, but and because we're a part of the City University of New York, there's some layers of protection there. Most of our predominantly Black institutions or HBCU institutions don't have sort of the structural protections that a Medgar Evers College might have. What
Yeah.
should the community be preparing for as it pertains to protecting these institutions so that they are there for generations to come?
Well, first, shout out to Medgar Evers College.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
interesting, you're there doing great work there, and another person who was there and did great work there was, of course, Betty Shabazz.
Yes.
Uh,
Who
you know,
worked at the Center for Law and Social Justice, which is the law center that I run. Shout out to the great ancestor, Betty Shabazz. Her daughters, she and Malcolm, their daughters, were at Medgar just a few weeks ago for an event.
yes,
But she was a member of our law center. So yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And to your point in terms of what the community can do, I think first and foremost, the way that uh, racist attacks are operating right now is there's a constant and routine efforts to smear and topple, strong Black leaders, and so we have to be quite vigilant when we see Black leaders being smeared and attacked in the press. They want, most especially Black people, to feel or believe there's something wrong with that Black leader, so they don't support that Black leader.
Right.
And that's not to say no Black leaders, ever make mistakes, but more times than not, this Black leader um, is being attacked for something white leaders are simply not being attacked for. And so I think it's important for us to be vigilant and to be critical of what we're seeing in the press around Black leaders. But then I also think it's important to organize resources for these institutions. And so that's another way in which, as you mentioned, the starving of HBCUs, in the South, we have the ability to organize resources for our Black, in institutions. We have the ability to send our brightest and best to those institutions. So that's not just sending students to HBCUs, that's us deciding we're going to go and work at those institutions, despite them having less resources or less sort of prestige, in the white community.